The morning sun cast long shadows across the palace gardens as Catherine, the Princess of Wales, stood by the tall windows of her private quarters. Her fingers traced the cold glass while she watched the groundskeepers tend to the rose bushes below. These same roses had bloomed every spring for decades, witnessing countless royal moments of joy and sorrow. Today, they would witness something unprecedented. William entered the room quietly, his footsteps barely audible on the polished wooden floor. Even after all these years of marriage, Catherine could sense his presence without turning around. There was a weight in his movements that spoke of the burden he carried, not just as a future king, but as a man facing an impossible choice. "The children are asking questions again," Catherine said softly, still gazing out at the garden. "George wanted to know why there are so many photographers at the gates." Charlotte heard the staff whispering. "Louis just knows something is different." William approached slowly, his reflection appearing beside hers in the window. "What did you tell them?" "The truth, as much as they can understand. That sometimes, even when we love someone very much, circumstances force us to make difficult decisions." Her voice remained steady, but William could see the slight tremor in her hands. The decision they faced was not one any couple should have to make, yet the weight of the crown demanded sacrifices that ordinary people could never imagine. For months, they had wrestled with information that could change the course of the monarchy forever, information that, if revealed, would protect the institution but tear their family apart. Catherine had discovered documents hidden deep within the palace archives, papers that revealed a centuries-old agreement that could strip William of his rightful place in the line of succession. The legal implications were complex, involving ancient laws and forgotten clauses that most constitutional experts believed were merely historical curiosities. But these documents were real and they were valid. The choice was simple yet devastating. William could renounce his claim to the throne voluntarily, allowing the crown to pass to George when the time came, or face a public legal battle that would expose the documents and potentially delegitimize the entire royal line. Either way, their life as they knew it would end. "I keep thinking about our wedding day," Catherine whispered, finally turning to face her husband. "When we promised to face everything together, for better or worse. I never imagined worse would mean choosing between love and duty in such an impossible way." William's eyes were red-rimmed from sleepless nights spent poring over legal documents and constitutional texts. "My grandmother faced a similar choice once, though different circumstances. She chose duty over personal happiness. My father struggled with the same burden. Now it's our turn." The irony wasn't lost on either of them. For years, the media had praised Catherine for bringing a sense of normalcy to the royal family. She had been the commoner who became a princess, the modern woman who balanced motherhood with royal duties. Now, that very normalcy was about to be ripped away by forces neither of them could control. Outside, the sound of helicopters grew louder. The media had sensed something significant was happening, though they didn't yet know what. Palace staff moved with unusual urgency, and several high-ranking officials had been seen entering and leaving through private entrances. The speculation was growing by the hour. "There's still time to reconsider," William said, though they both knew it wasn't true. The legal deadline was approaching, and every day they delayed made the eventual revelation more damaging to the monarchy as a whole. Catherine walked to her dressing table and picked up a small velvet box. Inside was the sapphire engagement ring that had once belonged to Diana, Princess of Wales. The ring that had symbolized so much hope and promise when William had placed it on her finger all those years ago. "Your mother faced impossible choices too," she said, holding the ring up to catch the morning light. "She chose to follow her heart, regardless of the consequences. Maybe it's time we did the same." William joined her at the dressing table, their eyes meeting in the ornate mirror. If we do this, there's no going back. The children will grow up differently than we planned. You'll never be queen. I'll never wear the crown. But we'll still be a family, Catherine replied. We'll still be us. The weight of their decision settled over them like a heavy blanket. They had always known that royal life required sacrifices, but they had never imagined sacrificing their royal life itself. The documents in Catherine's possession could remain secret if William renounced his claim voluntarily. The monarchy would survive, their children would be protected, but their role in the institution they had served faithfully would end. A soft knock at the door interrupted their moment of quiet contemplation. It was Margaret, Catherine's longtime personal assistant, who had been with her since before the engagement. Margaret's face was pale, and her usually perfect composure showed cracks of worry. "Your Royal Highnesses, the private secretary requests an urgent meeting. The Prime Minister is on his way to the palace, and several constitutional experts have been summoned. The media is reporting unusual activity, and there are questions being asked in Parliament." William and Catherine exchanged a look that spoke volumes. Their secret was on the verge of being exposed, whether they were ready or not. The choice they had been agonizing over was about to be made for them. "Tell them we'll be down in 10 minutes, William said quietly. Margaret nodded and left, closing the door softly behind her. Catherine returned to the window, watching as more official cars arrived at the palace. "Do you remember what you said to me the night before our wedding? You said that no matter what happened, we would face it together. That our love was stronger than any challenge the royal life could throw at us." "I meant every word," William replied, moving to stand behind her and placing his hands gently on her shoulders. "Then let's face this together too. Whatever comes next, we'll meet it as a family. The children deserve parents who chose love and integrity over titles and tradition." The morning light had shifted, casting new patterns across the garden below. The roses continued to bloom, indifferent to the human drama unfolding in the rooms above them. Soon, those same roses would witness a farewell that would change the British monarchy forever. William and Catherine stood together in their private quarters for what might be the last time as senior royals. The weight of history pressed down on them, but so did the lightness that comes from finally making a difficult decision. They had chosen each other, chosen their family, chosen a different kind of future. The hardest part would be explaining their choice to a nation that had watched their love story unfold with such hope and admiration. The people who had cheered at their wedding, celebrated the birth of their children, and seen them as symbols of a modernizing monarchy would soon learn that sometimes even fairy tales must end. But perhaps, Catherine thought as she took one last look at the garden below, this wasn't really an ending. Perhaps it was simply the beginning of a different kind of story, one written by their own choices rather than the weight of centuries-old traditions. The helicopters circled overhead, the photographers waited at the gates, and somewhere in the palace, officials prepared for conversations that would reshape the future of the crown. But in their private quarters, William and Catherine had already found their peace with the decision that would soon stir a nation and change their lives forever. The mahogany doors of the palace's blue drawing room opened with a soft creak that seemed to echo through the centuries of royal history contained within its walls. William entered first, his shoulders straight despite the weight he carried, followed closely by Catherine, who moved with the grace that had made her beloved by millions around the world. Around the ornate table sat the most powerful figures in British government and the royal establishment. The Prime Minister, looking grave and tired, shuffled through a stack of documents. The Archbishop of Canterbury, called in for his constitutional expertise, sat quietly with his hands folded. Several legal advisors, constitutional scholars, and the Queen's private secretary completed the circle of those who would witness this unprecedented moment. "Your Royal Highnesses," the Prime Minister began, rising as they entered, "I understand you've made your decision. Catherine felt William's hand briefly touch hers, a silent reminder of their unity in this moment. They had rehearsed these words in their private quarters, but speaking them aloud to these representatives of the state would make them real in a way that terrified and relieved them simultaneously. "We have," William said, his voice steady. "After careful consideration of all the evidence and legal opinions presented to us, we have decided that the best course of action for the monarchy, for our family, and for the nation is for me to renounce my claim to the throne." The silence that followed was deafening. Even though everyone in the room had suspected this outcome, hearing the words spoken aloud by the future King of England created a gravity that seemed to press down on everyone present. The Archbishop of Canterbury was the first to speak. "Your Royal Highness, this decision, while within your legal right, will have profound implications for the Church of England, for the Commonwealth realms, and for millions of people who have seen you as their future sovereign. Are you absolutely certain this is the path you wish to take?" Catherine stepped forward slightly, her presence adding weight to William's words. "Your Grace, we understand the magnitude of this decision. We have not taken it lightly, but we believe that a monarchy built on truth and integrity, even if that requires difficult choices, is stronger than one maintained through concealment of facts that could undermine its legitimacy." The Prime Minister leaned back in his chair, the political implications clearly weighing on his mind. "The public will demand explanations. Parliament will have questions. The media will dissect every aspect of this decision. How do you propose we handle the announcement?" "With honesty," William replied. "The British people deserve to know the truth about the documents Catherine discovered and the legal complications they present. They deserve to understand that this choice was made to protect the institution of the monarchy, not to damage it." One of the constitutional lawyers, a woman who had spent her career studying royal succession law, cleared her throat nervously. "Might I suggest, Your Royal Highness, that we consider the precedent this sets? If every future heir can simply renounce their claim when faced with legal complications, what does that mean for the stability of the crown?" "It means," Catherine said quietly, "that the crown adapts and survives as it has for 1,000 years. It means that those who serve it do so out of genuine calling, not because they're trapped by circumstances beyond their control." Outside the room, palace staff continued their duties, unaware that the conversation taking place behind those doors would reshape their lives and the lives of millions of others. The tourists who gathered daily at the palace gates, hoping for a glimpse of royalty, had no idea they were witnessing history in the making. The Queen's private secretary, a man who had served the royal family for 3 decades, spoke with the weight of someone who had seen the monarchy weather many storms. Their late Majesty Queen Elizabeth faced the abdication crisis with her Uncle Edward. She understood that sometimes the greater good requires personal sacrifice. I believe she would understand your position, even if she might have chosen differently. William's jaw tightened slightly at the mention of his grandmother. Her death had left him not just grieving a beloved family member, but grappling with the enormous responsibility that now rested on his shoulders. A responsibility he was about to voluntarily set down. "My grandmother taught me that duty comes in many forms," he said. "Sometimes duty means accepting a burden you never wanted. Sometimes it means carrying on traditions that feel outdated. And sometimes it means making hard choices to protect something larger than yourself." The legal implications were staggering. Parliamentary procedures would need to be followed to formalize the renunciation. The succession would pass directly to Prince George, with a regency established until he came of age. The constitutional framework of 16 Commonwealth realms would need to be adjusted. It would be months, possibly years, before all the legal ramifications were fully addressed. But beyond the legal complexities lay human stories that would be affected by this decision. Palace staff who had dedicated their careers to serving William and Catherine would need to be reassigned. Charities and organizations that had counted on their royal patronage would need to adapt. Communities around the world that had planned future royal visits would need to reconsider their expectations. "There's one more thing we need to discuss," Catherine said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Our children. George in particular needs to understand what this means for his future." The room fell silent again. Prince George, barely old enough to understand the complexities of royal life, would now face a very different future than anyone had planned. Instead of having years to gradually prepare for eventual kingship, he would suddenly be first in line, with his parents unable to guide him through the specific challenges of royal duty from personal experience. "We've arranged for child psychologists and royal historians to help with that transition," the private secretary said gently. "But ultimately, this conversation will need to come from you." William closed his eyes briefly, imagining that conversation with his eldest son. How do you tell a child that their entire future has changed because of documents hidden in dusty archives? How do you explain that sometimes parents make choices that affect their children in ways those children never asked for? "George is strong," Catherine said, as if reading his thoughts. "All our children are. They'll adapt because they'll understand that we made this choice out of love for them and for the institution that will shape their lives." The Prime Minister gathered his papers, the action signaling that the formal aspects of their discussion were drawing to a close. "We'll need to coordinate the announcement with Buckingham Palace, Downing Street, and the Commonwealth offices. This news will reach every corner of the globe within hours of its release." "When?" William asked. "Tomorrow morning. It gives us time to prepare all the necessary statements and brief the relevant officials. It also gives you time for any final preparations you need to make privately." As the officials began to file out of the room, each offering their own version of support and understanding, William and Catherine remained seated at the table where kings and queens had made decisions that shaped nations for centuries. "Do you think we'll regret this?" Catherine asked once they were alone. William considered the question seriously. "I think we might regret some of the consequences. We might regret not being able to serve in the way we planned. But I don't think we'll regret choosing our integrity over our titles." Through the tall windows of the blue drawing room, they could see the garden where they had stood that morning, before their private conversation became a matter of state. The roses were still blooming, still indifferent to human drama, still beautiful in their simplicity. Tomorrow their names would be front-page news around the world. Commentators would analyze their decision, historians would place it in context, and the public would react with everything from understanding to outrage. But tonight, they were still the Duke and Duchess of Cambridge, still the parents of 3 young children, still the couple who had promised to face everything together. The hardest part of their goodbye was yet to come. Tomorrow, they would have to say farewell, not just to their royal roles, but to the dreams and expectations of millions of people who had invested emotionally in their story. They would have to explain to a nation why love and integrity had demanded a choice that would change the monarchy forever. But they had made their decision with full hearts and clear consciences, and that would have to be enough to sustain them through whatever came next. The morning of the announcement arrived with an unusual stillness over London. Even the ever-present hum of traffic seemed muted, as if the city itself was holding its breath for what was to come. Inside Kensington Palace, William and Catherine moved through their final hours as senior royals with a mixture of solemnity and unexpected peace. Catherine stood in her dressing room, carefully selecting what she would wear for their final public appearance. Every choice felt weighted with symbolism. The blue dress she eventually chose had been a favorite of Queen Elizabeth's, a subtle nod to the woman who had taught them both about duty and sacrifice. The sapphire earrings were a wedding gift from William, a reminder of the personal love that had sustained them through this impossible decision. Down the hall, William was having the conversation they had both been dreading. Prince George sat on his father's bed, his young face serious as he tried to understand words like renunciation and constitutional crisis. At 11 years old, he was old enough to grasp that his life was about to change dramatically, but too young to fully comprehend the historical significance of what his parents had chosen. "Will I still be a prince?" George asked, his voice small and uncertain. "Yes," William said, kneeling down to meet his son's eyes. "You'll always be a prince, and someday, when you're much older, you'll be king. But your mother and I have decided that we need to step back from our royal duties to protect something very important about our family and about the crown itself." Princess Charlotte, 9 years old and perceptive beyond her years, had been listening from the doorway. "Is it because of those old papers Mummy found?" Catherine appeared beside her daughter, surprised by how much the children had pieced together from overheard conversations and the unusual atmosphere in their home. "Yes, sweetheart. Those papers created some complicated problems, and this was the best way to solve them." Prince Louis, at 7 still the baby of the family, understood only that his parents seemed sad and that there were more serious conversations happening than usual. He climbed onto William's lap, offering the wordless comfort that children provide simply by being themselves. "We want you to know," Catherine said, sitting on the bed beside them, "that everything we've done has been to protect you, and to make sure that when George becomes king someday, he can do so with complete confidence that his right to the throne is unquestionable." The family moment was interrupted by a soft knock. It was time for William and Catherine to make their way to the palace's grand hall, where members of the press and palace staff would gather to hear the announcement that would reshape the British monarchy. As they walked through the corridors of Kensington Palace, past portraits of previous royals who had faced their own crises and challenges, William and Catherine were acutely aware that they were walking into history. Their names would be remembered alongside Edward VIII, who abdicated for love, but their circumstances were entirely different. They were not choosing personal happiness over duty. They were choosing a different definition of duty itself. The grand hall buzzed with tension as they entered. Reporters who had covered the royal family for decades could sense that something monumental was about to occur, but the exact nature of the announcement remained a closely guarded secret. Palace staff who had served William and Catherine faithfully stood along the walls, their faces reflecting confusion and concern. William approached the podium that had been set up in front of the hall's magnificent windows. The morning light streaming in created an almost ethereal atmosphere, appropriate for a moment that would be remembered for generations. Catherine stood slightly to his right, her presence a reminder that this decision had been made together. "Ladies and gentlemen," William began, his voice carrying clearly through the suddenly silent room. "Thank you for joining us this morning for what I know will be difficult news for many of you to hear." He paused, gathering himself for words that would change everything. "After much consideration and consultation with constitutional experts, government officials, and our family, I am today announcing my formal renunciation of my claim to the throne of the United Kingdom and the Commonwealth realms." The reaction was immediate and dramatic. Gasps echoed through the hall, cameras flashed rapidly, and several reporters began frantically typing on their phones. But William continued speaking, his voice never wavering. "This decision has not been made lightly, nor has it been made for personal reasons. Recent discoveries of historical documents have created legal complications regarding the succession that could, if left unresolved, undermine the legitimacy of the monarchy itself. Rather than subject the crown to a prolonged constitutional crisis, we have chosen to act decisively to protect the institution that has served Britain for over 1,000 years. Catherine stepped forward to the microphone, her voice steady despite the magnitude of the moment. "We want to be clear that this decision comes from our deep love and respect for the monarchy, not from any desire to abandon our service to the British people. We believe that a crown built on transparency and integrity, even when that requires difficult choices, is stronger than one maintained through concealment. The questions came rapidly after that, each one reflecting different aspects of the constitutional, political, and personal implications of their announcement. How would this affect the Commonwealth? What would happen to their charitable work? Had they consulted with King Charles? What did their children think? William and Catherine answered each question with the careful thought that had characterized their entire approach to this crisis. They explained that Prince George would inherit the throne when the time came, with appropriate preparations and support. They confirmed that they would continue their charitable work in a private capacity. They expressed their continued love and support for King Charles and their hope that the monarchy would emerge from this transition stronger than before. But perhaps the most powerful moment came when a reporter asked about their personal feelings regarding the decision. "This has been the most difficult choice of our lives," Catherine said, her composed exterior finally showing a crack of emotion. "We never imagined when we married that we would face such circumstances, but we promised each other that we would always put our family and our principles first, even when that required tremendous sacrifice." William added, "We have been privileged to serve the British people and the Commonwealth for over a decade. That service has been the honor of our lives, and stepping away from it is not something we do without profound sadness. But we believe that sometimes the greatest service we can provide is knowing when to step aside for the greater good." As the formal announcement concluded and the press was escorted out to begin their frenzied coverage of the story, William and Catherine remained in the grand hall for a few quiet moments. Palace staff approached them one by one, offering their personal thanks for years of service and their understanding of the difficult position they had faced. Margaret, Catherine's longtime assistant, was among the last to approach them. She had served Catherine since before the engagement, witnessing every major moment of their royal life. Now she would witness its end as well. "Your Royal Highnesses," she said, her voice thick with emotion, "it has been the privilege of my life to serve you. You have faced this impossible situation with such dignity and grace. The history books will remember that you chose integrity over ease, principle over comfort." As they finally left the grand hall and returned to their private quarters, William and Catherine could already hear the helicopters circling overhead and see the gathering crowds at the palace gates. The news was spreading across the globe with unprecedented speed. Social media exploded with reactions ranging from shock to support to anger. News channels cleared their schedules for wall-to-wall coverage of the constitutional crisis that had suddenly erupted. But in their private sitting room, surrounded by family photographs and personal mementos, William and Catherine found an unexpected sense of peace. They had spent months agonizing over this decision, weighing impossible choices and considering unthinkable consequences. Now that the words had been spoken and the die cast, there was a relief in having the burden of secrecy finally lifted. Their children joined them as the day progressed, each processing the news in their own way. George asked thoughtful questions about what his future would look like. Charlotte worried about whether they would have to move house. Louis was primarily concerned about whether he could still play with his friends. "The important thing," Catherine told them as they sat together that evening, "is that we're still a family. We still love each other, we still live in the same house, and we still have each other. Everything else we can figure out as we go." Outside their windows, London continued its eternal rhythm. The Thames flowed past the Houses of Parliament where emergency sessions were being called to address the constitutional implications of the day's announcement. The towers of Westminster Abbey stood silent, having witnessed the crowning and burial of monarchs for nearly a millennium, and now witnessing another unprecedented chapter in royal history. The goodbye that had stirred the nation was complete, but in many ways, it felt more like a beginning than an ending. William and Catherine had chosen a path that prioritized truth over tradition, integrity over inheritance, and family over titles. It was a choice that would be debated and analyzed for generations, but it was a choice they had made together, with full hearts and clear consciences. As they put their children to bed that night, the same routine they had followed for years, there was a sense that while their public roles had ended, their most important roles as parents, as partners, and as people of principle would continue. They had given up their claim to the throne, but they had kept their claim to their own souls. The nation they had served would adapt, as it always had. The monarchy would survive, as it always had. And William and Catherine would move forward together, facing whatever came next with the same unity and determination that had carried them through the most difficult decision of their lives.